Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The notification chimed at 3:47 AM, cutting through the silence of Europa Research Station Omega like a blade. Dr. Adrian Kane had been staring at the same batch of subsurface readings for the past 4 hours, his coffee long since turned bitter and cold when the drilling platform's automated systems registered something that shouldn't exist. Kane rubbed his bloodshot eyes and leaned closer to the display, certain he was misreading the data. For 3 weeks, the deep core drilling operation had been boring through Europa's ice shell with methodical precision, searching for microscopic signs of life in the hidden ocean below. The mission parameters were clear. Penetrate 12 kilometers of ice, deploy sensing equipment into the subsurface waters, and catalogue whatever primitive organisms might exist in that alien sea. Instead, at 8 kilometers depth, the drill had encountered something impossible. Void spaces. Massive void spaces that stretched beyond the range of their sensors, filled with what the atmospheric analyzers insisted was breathable air. The readings showed structured environments, geometric patterns, organized networks of spaces that could only have been created by intelligence. Kane's fingers moved across the workstation controls with practiced efficiency, running diagnostic after diagnostic, hoping to find some equipment malfunction that would explain away the impossible data. Each test came back clean. The sensors were functioning perfectly. The readings were accurate. Something had built cities beneath Europa's ice. The drilling platform's status display suddenly flashed crimson, accompanied by alarms that echoed through the empty observation deck. Catastrophic pressure loss. The automated systems were registering a complete breach into whatever lay beneath the ice, and the environmental readings that followed made Kane's breath catch in his throat. Stable atmosphere, artificial lighting, active electromagnetic signatures that pulsed with the rhythm of a living city. Kane activated the emergency protocols and sent a priority alert to Dr. Elena Vasquez, the mission commander. He sat in stunned silence, watching readouts that challenged everything he thought he knew about Europa, until Vasquez arrived 10 minutes later. Her usually immaculate appearance, disheveled from sleep, but her mind sharp with alertness. "What's happening down there, Adrian?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. Kane gestured to the main display, where the sonar imaging system was painting a picture that would haunt his dreams for years to come. Stretching across the ocean floor was a metropolis that dwarfed anything humans had built on Earth. Towers spiraled upward through the water like living things, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that created constellations of light in the eternal darkness. Transportation networks connected massive structures in perfect geometric harmony, and gardens of some impossible coral analogue spread between the buildings, like arteries of living light. "It's not natural," Kane said quietly. "Look at these patterns, Elena. These are streets, those are residential districts. That's urban planning on a scale we've never attempted." Vasquez stared at the display, her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her eyes. There has to be an explanation. Volcanic activity, unusual ice formation, something that creates these geometric patterns naturally. But even as she spoke, both scientists knew they were looking at something that intelligence had designed and built. The structures were too regular, too purposeful, too clearly organized to be the result of any natural process. "Elena," Kane said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think we need to consider the possibility that we're not the first intelligent species to reach Europa." the communication array activated before Vasquez could respond, flooding the observation deck with a burst of electromagnetic pulses that made every screen flicker and dance. Kane quickly routed the signal through the station's translation systems, expecting to decode some form of natural phenomenon or equipment interference. What appeared on the screen instead stopped his heart. A message in perfect English. "Surface dwellers, we know you have found us. We have been waiting centuries for this moment." The voice that followed through the speakers was unmistakably human, but it carried harmonics that no human throat should have been able to produce. The accent was familiar yet archaic, as if it belonged to someone who had learned English from very old recordings. "Please respond, cousins from above," the voice continued. "We have much to discuss about the future of our species." Kane felt the blood drain from his face as the implications hit him. Not only was there intelligent life beneath Europa's ice, but that life claimed kinship with humanity itself. "Get me the colonial archives," Kane said, his hands trembling as he worked the station's historical database. "Everything we have on early expansion missions to the outer system." The search took 6 hours of intensive investigation before they uncovered the truth buried in classified mission reports from the pioneer era of interplanetary exploration. The colony ship Prometheus had launched from Earth orbit in 2854, carrying 847 volunteers, selected for their expertise in engineering, biology, medicine, and other fields critical to establishing humanity's first permanent settlement beyond Mars. The Prometheus had been equipped with experimental technology that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in 2854. Closed-loop life support systems, advanced terraforming equipment, genetic modification laboratories, and most controversially, prototype neural enhancement systems designed to improve cognitive function during the long journey to the outer planets. 6 months after launch, the Prometheus had vanished completely. No distress signals, no debris fields, no trace of what had happened to the ship or its passengers. Search and rescue operations continued for 3 years before the mission was classified as a total loss. The 847 colonists were declared dead, and the Prometheus project was quietly buried in the archives. But the mission logs clearly indicated their intended destination: Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon, selected for its subsurface ocean and potential for supporting modified human life. "They've been down there for over 200 years, Vasquez whispered, scrolling through the passenger manifest that listed names, ages, specializations, and genetic profiles of every person aboard the lost ship. Kane stared at the data, his mind reeling with the implications. 2 centuries of isolation on an alien world, with access to experimental enhancement technologies and the pressure of survival in an utterly hostile environment. What had those people become? What had they done to themselves to survive? The answer would prove more terrifying than anything his scientific training had prepared him to imagine. First contact was arranged for the following week, allowing time for both sides to prepare for what would be the most significant meeting in human history. Kane volunteered to lead the contact team, driven by a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing dread about what they might discover in Europa's hidden depths. The research submersible Endeavour represented the pinnacle of underwater exploration technology, capable of withstanding crushing pressures while maintaining life support for an extended crew. Kane took the pilot's position, his 15 years of deep sea experience making him the natural choice to navigate Europa's alien waters. Dr. Vasquez occupied the co-pilot seat, monitoring environmental systems and communication arrays. Marine biologist Dr. James Harrison operated the external cameras and sensor packages from the rear compartment, while Dr. Lisa Park managed the complex equipment needed to maintain contact with both the surface station and whatever awaited them below. As the Endeavour descended through Europa's dark ocean, Kane couldn't escape the feeling that they were entering a realm that had been transformed beyond recognition. The water itself seemed different somehow, moving in currents too regular to be natural, and filled with microscopic organisms that pulsed with synchronized bioluminescence. Schools of creatures that might once have been fish swam past the submersible in perfect formations, their bodies modified with what appeared to be technological implants. Depth 7 kilometers and descending, Park reported from her station, receiving guidance signals from multiple sources below. The signals had begun as soon as they entered the deeper waters, electromagnetic pulses that seemed designed to guide them along specific routes through the underwater landscape. Whoever was sending them clearly wanted to control every aspect of the approaching encounter. At 8 kilometers depth, the first structures came into view, and Kane felt his conception of the possible shatter like glass. The buildings rose from the ocean floor like living organisms, their surfaces covered in tissue that pulsed with internal circulation systems. Corridors of what appeared to be modified coral connected the structures in networks that stretched beyond the range of their lights. Gardens of engineered organisms provided illumination and what might have been atmospheric processing, their fronds swaying in artificially generated currents. But it was the inhabitants that made Kane's blood turn to ice. Figures moved between the buildings with a fluid grace that defied human anatomy, their elongated forms cutting through the water with efficiency no baseline human could achieve. As they drew closer, Kane could see that the beings were recognizably human in basic structure, but everything about their proportions had been altered for life in this alien environment. "My God," Harrison breathed over the comm system. "They've redesigned themselves completely." The submersible was guided to a landing platform that appeared to have been grown specifically for their arrival, its organic surface adjusting to accommodate the Endeavour's hull. Through the viewing ports, Kane watched as dozens of Europa's inhabitants emerged from the surrounding structures, moving with perfect coordination toward their predetermined positions. The being who approached them first was clearly their representative, and Kane felt his sanity strain as he tried to process what he was seeing. The figure was nearly 3 meters tall, its limbs stretched to impossible lengths while remaining recognizably human in structure. Its skin was translucent pale, revealing modified circulatory systems beneath, and its skull had been enlarged to accommodate what must have been a significantly enhanced brain. But it was the eyes that nearly broke Kane's composure. Completely black, without iris or pupil, they reflected the submersible's lights like pools of liquid obsidian. When the being spoke, its voice carried clearly through the water via some technology Kane couldn't begin to understand. "Welcome, distant cousins," the figure said, its words accompanied by harmonics that seemed to resonate in Kane's bones. "I am Nathaniel Torres, 4th-generation descendant of Miguel Torres, Chief Engineering Officer of the Prometheus. We have waited long for this reunion." Kane's mouth went dry as he recognized the name from the passenger manifest. The being floating outside their submersible was a direct descendant of the lost colonists, but it had become something that challenged the very definition of humanity. The formal meeting took place in what Torres called the Assembly of Voices, a vast chamber deep within the city complex that had been filled with breathable atmosphere for their benefit. Kane and his team were provided with breathing apparatus that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured, their surfaces warm and slightly pliable, adjusting automatically to their respiratory patterns. The chamber itself defied conventional architecture, its walls curving in ways that seemed to create more internal space than should have been possible given the external dimensions. Bioluminescent panels provided illumination that cast no shadows, and the floor beneath their feet felt alive, yielding slightly with each step, as if they were walking on living tissue. Torres moved through the space with movements that were part walking, part swimming, his elongated limbs carrying him with an efficiency that made Kane feel clumsy and primitive by comparison. Around the chamber's perimeter, other descendants watched the proceedings with those disturbing black eyes, standing in perfect stillness that no baseline human could maintain. "Your ancestors were remarkable people," Kane said, fighting to keep his voice steady as he studied their hosts. "The Prometheus mission was classified as lost over 2 centuries ago. How did the original colonists manage to survive Europa's environment?" Torres smiled, revealing teeth that had evolved into sharp points better suited for their modified diet. "Survival required transformation, Dr. Kane. Europa offered everything necessary for human life, but only for humans willing to become something greater than their origins." Kane noticed more details of the Europan physiology as Torres spoke. Gill slits along his neck fluttered rhythmically, allowing him to process both water and air with equal efficiency. His fingers ended in webbed appendages that could serve as both hands and swimming aids. Most disturbing, his skin seemed to shift colour slightly in response to his emotional state, suggesting integration with chromatophore cells borrowed from cephalopod genetics. "The adaptations you've achieved are extraordinary," Dr. Vasquez said with diplomatic caution. "The biological engineering involved must have taken generations to perfect." "Engineering implies external construction," Torres replied, his obsidian eyes reflecting the chamber's soft lighting. "We redesigned ourselves from within, using the enhancement technologies the Prometheus carried, and improving upon them through controlled evolution. Enhanced cognitive capacity, extended lifespans, perfect integration between individual consciousness and collective purpose." Dr. Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "Collective purpose?" Torres gestured to the other descendants around the chamber, and Kane felt his skin crawl as they all turned their heads in perfect unison, focusing those alien black eyes on Harrison with mechanical precision. When Torres spoke his next words, several of the others mouthed them simultaneously. "We have transcended the barriers that limit baseline humanity," Torres explained. "Individual consciousness creates inefficiency, misunderstanding, conflict. We share thoughts, knowledge, emotions, and purposes directly. We are no longer trapped within the isolation of separate minds." Kane felt a chill that had nothing to do with Europa's cold as he realized what Torres was describing. The descendants had achieved some form of collective consciousness. Their enhanced brains networked together in ways that eliminated individual privacy and autonomy. They weren't separate people anymore. They were components of a larger intelligence. "How much do you know about current conditions on Earth?" Dr. Park asked from her position near the chamber's entrance. Torres's expression shifted subtly, and Kane glimpsed something predatory in those black depths. "We know everything that matters, Dr. Park. We have maintained observation of our parent world for many decades, studying its development, analysing its weaknesses, preparing for our eventual return." "Return?" Kane asked, though he suspected he already knew what Torres meant. "Did you imagine this meeting was accidental?" Torres replied. "We guided your drilling operations to the precise location where breakthrough would occur. We have been monitoring your research station since its arrival in Jupiter space. We have agents positioned throughout your governmental and scientific institutions on Earth." The revelation hit Kane like a physical blow. The descendants hadn't been discovered by chance. They had orchestrated the entire encounter, manipulating Earth's scientific community into finding them when they were ready to be found. "How long have you been observing us?" Vasquez asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Long enough to understand that baseline humanity has reached the limits of its potential," Torres said with casual indifference. "Your people struggle with problems we solved generations ago. War, environmental destruction, resource competition, the inefficiencies of individual consciousness. They remain trapped by the biological limitations that we have transcended." Kane studied Torres's alien features, searching for some trace of the human being his ancestor must have been. "What do you want from Earth?" Torres' smile revealed more of those pointed teeth. "We want to go home, Dr. Kane. We want to reclaim the world our ancestors left behind and share our improvements with our primitive cousins. We want to complete the work that Prometheus began, the evolution of humanity into something worthy of the cosmos." The tour of Europa's civilization lasted 12 hours, and with each revelation, Kane felt his hope for humanity's future diminish. The descendants had transformed the entire moon into a living system, with cities that spanned thousands of kilometers beneath the ice. Their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's, based on biological engineering that could grow structures, vehicles, and weapons from modified organisms. In the military complexes, Kane watched enhanced soldiers practice maneuvers that redefined his understanding of human capability. They could survive in vacuum without protection, their modified physiology allowing them to operate in environments that would kill baseline humans instantly. Their skeletal systems had been reinforced with metallic composites that made their bones nearly unbreakable. Their muscular systems had been redesigned for maximum efficiency, giving them strength that far exceeded human norms. Most disturbing of all, they moved with absolute coordination, executing complex tactical operations without any visible communication between units. They were living weapons, each one capable of devastating entire military formations through their superior capabilities and perfect teamwork. "We have been preparing for the homecoming for 6 decades, Torres explained as they observed a new battalion completing its training cycle. Earth's current population will require extensive modification to achieve compatibility with our improved society." "You're planning an invasion," Dr. Harrison said, no longer bothering to hide his revulsion. "We prefer to think of it as a reunion," Torres corrected smoothly. "Earth belongs to humanity's true heirs. We have overcome the limitations that held our ancestors back. We live for centuries instead of decades. We have eliminated the destructive impulses that drive your people to conflict and environmental destruction. We represent humanity's destined evolution." Kane studied the training facility with the eye of someone who had served in Earth's military before pursuing his scientific career. There were thousands of enhanced soldiers, all moving with that same terrifying coordination. "When is this reunion supposed to take place?" "Very soon," Torres replied. "Our advanced teams have spent years preparing Earth's infrastructure for our arrival. Key systems will be neutralized, resistance movements eliminated, and the general population prepared for integration into our collective." "Integration?" Dr. Vasquez asked, though Kane suspected she already knew the answer. Torres led them to another section of the complex, where massive organic structures pulsed with internal activity that Kane gradually realized was some form of large-scale processing operation. The implications made his stomach turn as he understood what he was looking at. "Biological conversion facilities," Torres explained with evident pride. "We can transform baseline humans into our improved form through controlled genetic modification and neural restructuring. The process requires approximately 8 hours and has achieved a success rate of 96% in our trials." Kane forced himself to ask the question he dreaded. What happens to the 4% who can't be converted? "They lack the neural plasticity necessary for enhanced consciousness," Torres said with clinical detachment. "Such individuals represent genetic dead ends that must be eliminated to prevent contamination of future generations." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise what Torres was describing. Anyone who couldn't be converted to the descendant form would be killed. Kane felt physically sick as he realized the scope of what the Europans were planning. This wasn't military conquest in any traditional sense. It was species replacement. "I'd like to understand the conversion process in more detail," Kane said carefully, fighting to keep his voice steady and his expression neutral. The biological mechanisms involved must be incredibly sophisticated. Torres seemed pleased by the apparent scientific interest. Over the next several hours, he provided detailed explanations of the enhancement procedures, describing how human neural pathways could be restructured to accommodate expanded cognitive function, how the endocrine system could be modified to support their collective consciousness network, how the skeletal and muscular systems could be redesigned for optimal performance in various environmental conditions. As Torres talked, Kane began to identify crucial vulnerabilities in the descendant system. Their perfect coordination depended on a central processing nexus that managed the telepathic connections between individuals. The nexus was housed in a massive biological structure at the heart of their primary city, a living computer that had grown over decades to handle the mental traffic of their entire civilization. If that nexus could be disrupted or destroyed, the descendants would lose their greatest advantage. They would become individuals again, forced to communicate and coordinate using the same inefficient methods as baseline humans. The temporary confusion and disorientation would create opportunities for resistance that might otherwise be impossible. Kane also learned about other potential weaknesses. The enhanced soldiers required regular exposure to specific atmospheric compositions to maintain their modifications. Their accelerated metabolism demanded nutrients that could only be synthesized in specialized biological facilities. Most importantly, their neural enhancements made them vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies that could disrupt their thought processes and cause severe disorientation. "Your coordination system is remarkable," Kane said, pretending to be fascinated by their technological achievements. "How do you manage such complex neural networks across your entire population?" "The central nexus processes all cognitive traffic between our people," Torres explained, gesturing toward a holographic display that showed the massive structure Kane had identified as their critical vulnerability. "Every thought, every decision, every sensory input is shared through the nexus to ensure optimal coordination and eliminate the inefficiencies of individual consciousness." Kane memorized every detail of the nexus design, building a mental map of its structure, power systems, and defensive capabilities. He began to see possibilities for disruption, ways that Earth's forces might exploit the descendants' dependence on their collective consciousness network. But first, he had to find a way to get this information back to Earth without alerting his hosts to his true intentions. That night, as the research team was provided quarters in what Torres called the guest district, Kane made his decision. While his colleagues slept, he quietly activated the emergency communication system in his suit and began uploading everything he had learned about the descendant threat. Detailed tactical assessments, biological vulnerabilities, structural plans of the central nexus, and most critically, information about the infiltration agents already positioned on Earth. He was nearly finished with the data transmission when Torres appeared in the doorway of his quarters. "Dr. Kane," the descendant said, his voice carrying a note of disappointment that somehow made him seem even more alien than before. "Did you truly believe we wouldn't detect your deception?" Kane's blood turned to ice as he realized his fatal error. If the descendants shared thoughts through their neural network, they would have sensed his hostile intentions the moment he began planning his transmission. His attempt at stealth had been doomed from the start. "Your loyalty to your primitive cousins is admirable," Torres continued, moving into the room with that fluid grace that no baseline human could replicate, but ultimately pointless. "Even if they receive your warning, they lack both the technology and the unity necessary to threaten us meaningfully." More descendant soldiers appeared in the corridor behind Torres, their enhanced forms radiating predatory menace. Kane pressed his back against the communication console, his finger hovering over the final transmission control. "However," Torres said, "we cannot allow you to compromise the timeline of our homecoming operation. You will join us willingly and assist in the integration of your surface cousins, or you will be converted through more direct methods." Kane's finger found the emergency transmission button, and pressed it just as the first soldier reached him. Agony exploded through his nervous system as some form of biological weapon flooded his body with paralytic neurotoxins. But the message was already uploading to the communication beacon, carrying his warning toward Earth at the speed of light. The last thing he saw before losing control was Torres's expression of mild regret. "Such unnecessary suffering," the descendant said. "You could have been magnificent." Kane regained awareness, strapped to an organic platform in one of the conversion chambers, surrounded by pulsing biological machinery that seemed designed to rewrite human genetics at the molecular level. The walls around him writhed with internal movement, and he could hear the sound of fluids being pumped through living conduits that served as both power source and control system. Torres stood nearby, monitoring displays that appeared to be grown directly into the chamber's living walls. "The transformation process will begin shortly," he said without looking at Kane. "You will find the experience quite remarkable. Many of your surface cousins have expressed gratitude for the opportunity to transcend their biological limitations." But Kane had prepared for this possibility during his technical discussions with Torres. He had learned enough about descendant physiology to understand their metabolic requirements and identify potential disruption vectors. The emergency medical kit in his suit contained compounds designed to treat various space-related medical conditions, but some of those compounds would have catastrophic effects on the descendants' modified biology. When Torres leaned over the platform to verify the restraint systems, Kane bit down hard on the chemical capsule he had prepared and concealed in his mouth since early that morning. The mixture of stimulants, synthetic hormones, and metabolic inhibitors flooded his system with bitter fire, and he spat the solution directly into Torres's face and respiratory openings. The effect was immediate and devastating. Torres stumbled backward, his black eyes suddenly losing focus as the chemical cocktail disrupted his enhanced neural pathways and triggered cascade failures in his modified circulatory system. Around the chamber, other descendants began showing signs of severe distress as the disruption spread through their shared consciousness network. Kane used the confusion to rip free from the organic restraints, which had been designed to contain a baseline human, but hadn't accounted for the desperate strength of someone fighting for their species' survival. The conversion machinery convulsed and spasmed as he ripped through the biological control systems, causing structural failures to cascade through the entire facility. The escape through Europa's underwater cities became a nightmare of pursuit and desperation that would haunt Kane's memories forever. Enhanced soldiers chased him through flooded corridors, while the city itself seemed to turn against him. Walls contracted to block his path, water currents shifted to impede his progress, and bioluminescent organisms created disorienting strobe patterns designed to confuse and disorient intruders. But the chemical disruption was spreading faster than the descendants could compensate for its effects. Their perfect coordination was breaking down, creating gaps and delays in their response that Kane exploited with the tactical skills he had learned during his military service years earlier. He reached the Endeavour just as Torres appeared, his elongated features twisted with rage and the progressive effects of the chemical agent. "You have condemned your own species to extinction," Torres snarled, his voice distorted by neural disruption and respiratory distress. "We offered them transcendence beyond imagination, and you have chosen annihilation instead." Kane sealed the submersible's hatch and activated the emergency ascent protocol with trembling hands. "Maybe so," he said over the communication system, as the Endeavour began its desperate rise towards Europa's surface, "but at least they'll die as human beings." The ascent through Europa's dark waters passed in a blur of adrenaline, terror, and growing dread about what was coming for Earth. Kane's warning message had been transmitted, but he knew the descendant invasion fleet was already in motion, hidden among the natural debris of the Jupiter system and carrying the biological weapons necessary to transform Earth's entire population. As the Endeavour broke through Europa's surface ice and began its final approach to Research Station Omega, Kane stared out at Jupiter's roiling atmospheric storms and wondered whether humanity would prove as adaptable as their descendant cousins. The beings that had evolved in Europa's depths represented everything humans might become if they abandoned individual consciousness in favor of collective intelligence and perfect biological optimization. But they also represented everything humans would lose in that transformation: free will, individual creativity, personal autonomy, the beautiful chaos of separate minds working together despite their differences and disagreements. The descendants had solved humanity's problems by eliminating everything that made humans distinctive and valuable. Kane's transmission reached Earth's communication network 16 hours later, triggering immediate panic at the highest levels of government and military command. But even as Earth's defensive forces began mobilizing for the unprecedented threat, signs of descendant infiltration were already becoming apparent across the globe. Reports flooded in from every continent. Political leaders were making decisions that seemed calculated to compromise Earth's defensive capabilities. Military commanders were reassigning critical personnel to non-essential positions where they couldn't interfere with the coming invasion. Scientists working on advanced weapons projects were experiencing mysterious accidents, equipment failures, and data corruption that set back defensive preparations by crucial weeks. The invasion hadn't begun with the arrival of ships. It had been underway for years, orchestrated by agents who appeared completely human, but served the interests of Europa's evolved descendants. Dr. Vasquez found Kane in the observation deck 4 days after their return from Europa's depths, staring out at Jupiter's moons as they performed their eternal gravitational dance. "The initial intelligence reports from Earth are worse than we feared," she said, settling into the chair beside him with visible exhaustion. Kane nodded, without taking his eyes off Europa's distant, ice-covered surface. "How many of them do you think are already down there? How many people in critical positions have been working for the descendants all along?" "Intelligence agencies are conducting emergency security sweeps," Vasquez replied, "but the descendants have had decades to position their people. Some of them might have been born on Earth, raised as humans, never knowing their true nature until receiving activation orders." The implications were staggering and terrifying. Earth's defensive systems might already be compromised from within, with key personnel potentially working to ensure the invasion's success. Kane thought about Torres's casual confidence, his absolute certainty that baseline humanity lacked the capability to mount effective resistance. That confidence suggested the descendants possessed detailed intelligence about Earth's military capabilities, intelligence that could only have come from sources within Earth's own command structure. "There's something else," Vasquez said, handing Kane a data tablet displaying long-range sensor readings. "Deep space monitoring stations have detected massive energy signatures moving out from Jupiter space. Whatever's heading toward Earth, it's enormous." Kane studied the sensor data, his heart sinking as he recognized the energy patterns characteristic of descendant biotechnology. The invasion fleet was vast beyond anything he had imagined. Hundreds of ships carrying tens of thousands of enhanced soldiers and the biological weapons necessary to transform Earth's entire population. But it was the timeline that made Kane's blood run cold with despair. The fleet would reach Earth's orbital space in less than 36 hours. "They're not coming to conquer us in any traditional sense," Kane realized aloud. Torres said the conversion process has a success rate of 96%. They're planning to transform almost the entire human population into something like themselves. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment before responding. "And the other 4% who can't be converted?" Kane didn't need to answer. They both understood what happened to humans who couldn't adapt to the descendant modifications. The beings that had once been human had eliminated individual consciousness from their society by removing anyone who couldn't integrate into their collective intelligence network. they would apply the same solution to Earth's population. The next day brought confirmation of Kane's worst fears. Seismic monitoring stations worldwide were detecting artificial earthquake patterns that suggested someone was using advanced technology to destabilize critical infrastructure. Power grids in major cities were experiencing cascading failures that followed no natural progression. Communication networks were being disrupted by interference patterns that seemed designed to prevent coordination between Earth's defensive forces. Most ominous of all were the behavioral reports from major population centers. People in positions of authority were acting in ways that seemed calculated to maximize chaos and confusion. Government officials were issuing contradictory orders that paralyzed administrative functions. Military leaders were deploying forces in configurations that left critical areas completely undefended. Research teams working on defensive technologies were reporting systematic sabotage that destroyed months of crucial work. The descendant sleeper agents were activating across the globe, preparing Earth for invasion by creating maximum disruption to human civilization's ability to resist. Kane spent his final day aboard Station Omega, compiling detailed reports about everything he had learned in Europa's alien depths. Technical specifications for descendant biotechnology, biological data about their enhancements, tactical assessments of their military capabilities, and most crucially, comprehensive information about their vulnerabilities and the potential methods for exploiting those weaknesses. The central nexus remained their most critical vulnerability. If Earth's forces could somehow penetrate Europa's defenses and disable the massive biological structure that coordinated descendant consciousness, their enemies would lose their primary advantage. The descendants would become individuals again, forced to communicate and coordinate using the same inefficient methods that limited baseline humans. But reaching the nexus would require surviving in an environment that had been completely transformed by 2 centuries of biological engineering and defending against enhanced soldiers whose capabilities far exceeded anything in Earth's military arsenal. It would be a suicide mission under optimal circumstances, and Earth's forces were already compromised by unknown numbers of descendant infiltrators. As Kane completed his final reports, he found himself contemplating the philosophical implications of humanity's approaching transformation. The descendant civilization represented a possible future for human evolution, a path toward transcending individual consciousness and achieving perfect coordination and efficiency. They had eliminated war, poverty, environmental destruction, and virtually every other problem that plagued human civilization. But the price of their perfect society was the complete elimination of human individuality. Personal creativity, emotional autonomy, the magnificent diversity of separate minds working together despite their fundamental differences. The descendants had solved humanity's problems by destroying everything that made humans unique and valuable. Kane realized that the coming conflict wasn't simply about physical survival. It was about the fundamental question of what humanity should become. Should they embrace the descendant path toward collective consciousness and perfect biological optimization? Or should they fight to preserve their chaotic, inefficient, gloriously individual nature, even if that fight meant accepting extinction? The choice would be made within hours whether humanity was prepared for it or not. 24 hours before the descendant fleet reached Earth's orbital space, Kane received one final transmission from Europa's depths. Torres's image appeared on the communication screen, his elongated features showing no residual effects from the chemical weapon Kane had used during his escape. "Dr. Kane," Torres said, his voice carrying those same unsettling harmonics that characterized all descendant speech. "I want you to understand that what is about to occur is not motivated by hatred or conquest. We are offering your people a gift beyond their ability to comprehend." Kane activated the recording system and leaned forward, "a gift that involves killing anyone who refuses it." Evolution requires the elimination of inferior genetic lines, Torres replied without emotion. The weak must yield to the strong, the primitive to the advanced. Your surface cousins will become something magnificent, beyond their current understanding, or they will step aside for those capable of transcendence. You're describing genocide on a planetary scale. We are describing the completion of human evolution. Your people cling to individual consciousness as if it were precious, but they cannot perceive how severely it limits their potential. They wage wars because they cannot share their thoughts and intentions. They destroy their environment because they cannot coordinate their actions effectively. They suffer from isolation, misunderstanding, and destructive conflict because they remain trapped within the barriers of separate minds. Torres gestured, and the screen displayed images of Europa's cities with their perfect coordination and seamless integration of biological and technological systems. We have transcended all of these limitations. Our people exist in harmony because they share unified purpose and understanding. They create wonders because they can combine their knowledge without the inefficiencies of language and miscommunication. They have conquered death itself because individual consciousness can be preserved and shared even after biological bodies fail. Kane studied Torres's alien features, searching for some remnant of the humanity his ancestors had possessed. And you believe Earth's population will simply accept this transformation? Those who possess wisdom will embrace transcendence willingly. Those who resist will be converted by force to prevent their destructive influence on future generations. And those who cannot be converted will be eliminated to preserve the genetic integrity of our species. Torres paused, tilting his elongated head in that gesture that might have indicated curiosity. You have witnessed our capabilities, Dr. Kane. You understand that resistance will accomplish nothing except unnecessary suffering. Why do your people choose extinction over evolution? Kane considered how to answer that question. How could he explain to a being who had never experienced true individual consciousness why humans valued their chaotic, inefficient, magnificently diverse nature? How could he make Torres understand that humanity's greatest strength derived from the very differences and disagreements that the descendants had eliminated? Because being human isn't about achieving perfection, Kane finally said. It's about having the freedom to choose, including the right to be wrong, to make mistakes, to learn and grow as individuals. You've solved humanity's problems by eliminating everything that makes us human in the first place. Torres's obsidian eyes reflected the screen's illumination as he processed Kane's words. Your attachment to individual consciousness will be the destruction of your species, he said finally. We offered you transcendence, and you have chosen annihilation instead. So be it. The transmission ended, leaving Kane alone with the knowledge that humanity's fate would be determined within the next few hours. Earth's defensive forces were positioned and prepared, such as they were able to be given the widespread infiltration and sabotage. The warning had been delivered, vulnerabilities identified, and the choice made clear to anyone willing to listen. Now, all that remained was to discover whether humanity would prove strong enough to remain human, or whether the future belonged to the collective consciousness that had evolved in Europa's alien depths. As Kane watched Jupiter's great red spot churn through the observation port, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was witnessing the end of an evolutionary era. Whether humanity survived or perished in the coming hours, the species that had dreamed of reaching the stars and exploring the cosmos as individuals would never exist again in the same form. The age of human individuality was ending. The only remaining question was whether it would end through forced transformation or chosen extinction. The final transmission from Earth reached Station Omega 8 hours later. It was brief, desperate, and confirmed every one of Kane's darkest predictions. Emergency broadcast from Earth Defense Command. This is Admiral Chen speaking from NORAD Deep Complex. European forces have penetrated our outer perimeter defences. Biological weapons are being deployed simultaneously across all major population centres. We estimate that 75% of our command structure has been compromised by sleeper agents. Conversion facilities are being erected in real time using some kind of rapid biological construction technology. The Admiral's voice cracked with exhaustion and barely controlled panic. The transformations are happening faster than our worst-case projections. Converted individuals retain their memories and personalities but demonstrate complete loyalty to the European collective. They're not resisting. They're helping coordinate the process. Static filled the transmission for several seconds before Chen's voice returned, weaker now. Military resistance has been largely ineffective. Our weapons seem designed to be countered by their biological defences. It's like they've been studying our capabilities for decades and engineering specific countermeasures. Kane closed his eyes, knowing what was coming next. We're implementing the Omega Protocol, Chen continued. All remaining uncompromised personnel are being evacuated to hardened bunkers with orders to preserve human genetic material and cultural records. If anyone receives this transmission, know that we fought to remain human until the end. The message dissolved into static, then permanent silence. Kane stared at the dead communication array, understanding that he had just witnessed the end of baseline humanity as a spacefaring civilization. The descendants had succeeded beyond even Torres's confident predictions. Earth's conversion wasn't taking years or months. It was happening in a matter of days. Dr. Vasquez entered the observation deck, her face pale with shock. Adrian, we're receiving signals from Earth's major cities. The conversion rate is accelerating exponentially. London, New York, Tokyo, Moscow, they're all reporting completion percentages above 90%. Kane felt a numbness spreading through his chest. How is it happening so fast? The converted humans are actively participating in the process, Vasquez said, her voice hollow. They're convincing others to submit voluntarily, using personal relationships and emotional connections to overcome resistance. Family members converting family members. The psychological warfare is more effective than any military strategy. Through the viewport, Kane watched Europa's surface, knowing that beneath that frozen shell, Torres and his collective were monitoring their victory with satisfaction. They had played a game spanning decades, positioning their pieces with infinite patience while humanity remained completely unaware of the board. There's something else, Vasquez said quietly. We're detecting ships launching from Europa's surface. They're heading directly for our position. Kane's blood chilled. Of course, the descendants wouldn't leave any baseline humans alive, even isolated ones on a research station orbiting Jupiter. Their vision of perfection required complete genetic uniformity. No wildcards, no unpredictable individuals who might someday threaten their collective paradise. How long until they reach us? Kane asked. 18 hours, maybe less. Their propulsion systems are beyond anything we've seen before. Kane stood slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. The station had limited defensive capabilities designed for scientific research rather than military action. They could try to run, but where could they go? The descendants controlled the entire inner solar system now, and their ships were faster than anything humans had built. But perhaps running wasn't the answer. Perhaps there was still one card left to play. Elena, I need you to gather all the technical data we've collected about the central nexus, Kane said, moving toward the station's communication array. Everything, structural plans, power distribution, biological vulnerabilities. What are you thinking? Kane began activating the station's most powerful transmission systems, preparing to broadcast on every frequency that could reach the outer system. The descendants have one critical weakness. Their entire civilization depends on that nexus for coordination. If it could be destroyed. Adrian, that's suicide. Even if someone could reach Europa, penetrating their defenses would be impossible. Maybe, Kane said, his fingers flying over the controls. But there might be others out there. Other research stations, mining operations, military outposts in the outer system. People who haven't been reached by the conversion wave yet. Kane began broadcasting everything they had learned about Europa's hidden civilization. Technical specifications, tactical assessments, detailed plans of the central nexus, and most importantly, the exact electromagnetic frequencies that could disrupt descendant neural networks. Emergency transmission to all human outposts beyond Mars orbit, Kane spoke into the transmitter. This is Dr. Adrian Kane at Europa Research Station Omega. Earth has fallen to an evolved human subspecies that originated from the lost colony ship Prometheus. They are systematically converting the entire population through biological modification. I'm transmitting complete intelligence on their capabilities and vulnerabilities. Kane paused, watching Europa's surface through the viewport as he considered his next words. The conversion process eliminates individual consciousness in favor of collective intelligence. Those who cannot be converted are killed. This is not conquest. It is species replacement. He uploaded the technical data in compressed bursts, hoping someone in the outer system would receive it and understand its significance. Their entire coordination system depends on a biological structure called the central nexus, located beneath Europa's surface. If this structure could be destroyed or significantly damaged, their collective consciousness would collapse temporarily, creating an opportunity for resistance. The transmission continued for 6 hours, repeating on multiple frequencies to ensure maximum coverage throughout the solar system. Kane included everything he could think of that might help any remaining free humans survive or fight back. Biological vulnerabilities, electromagnetic disruption frequencies, structural plans, tactical assessments. The ships approaching our position will arrive in approximately 12 hours, Kane concluded. We will not be taken alive for conversion. This may be the last free human transmission from Jupiter space. Remember what we were. Remember what it meant to be individual human beings capable of choice, creativity, and independent thought. Kane ended the transmission and turned to find Vasquez standing behind him, tears streaming down her face. "It's really over, isn't it?" she said. "Everything we were, everything we built, everything we dreamed of becoming." Kane moved to the viewport and stared out at the cold stars, thinking about the irony of humanity's situation. They had reached for the stars as individuals, driven by curiosity and the desire to explore and understand the universe. Now their own evolved descendants were eliminating that very individuality in the name of perfection and efficiency. "Maybe," Kane said quietly, "or maybe this is just the beginning of a different kind of story." Over the next 10 hours, responses began arriving from the outer system. A mining operation on Ceres confirmed receipt of the intelligence data. A research outpost on Titan reported they were going into deep concealment protocols. Most significantly, a military installation near Pluto transmitted a coded acknowledgement that suggested they were already preparing some kind of response operation. Kane felt a flicker of hope. The descendants had achieved total victory in the inner system, but their control didn't extend to the outer planets yet. There were still free humans out there, and now they knew what they were facing. The descendant ships appeared on their sensors, 2 hours ahead of schedule, 3 sleek vessels that moved through space with the fluid grace of living creatures. Kane watched them approach, marveling at their alien beauty, even as he prepared for humanity's last stand at Jupiter. "They're not responding to communication attempts," Dr. Harrison reported from the sensor station. "Energy signatures suggest some kind of biological propulsion system." Kane activated the station's defensive systems, knowing they would be utterly inadequate against descendant technology. "All hands to emergency stations. This is not a drill." The lead ship moved into position, directly in front of Station Omega, its hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that created an eerie light show against the backdrop of Jupiter's storms. Kane could see movement within its transparent sections, descendant crew members working with perfect coordination to manage systems that seemed to be grown rather than built. A communication request came through, and Kane accepted it, knowing this would likely be his final conversation with the beings that had once been human. Torres appeared on the screen, but he was no longer alone. Behind him stood dozens of other descendants, their black eyes reflecting the ship's internal lighting as they regarded Kane with collective attention. "Dr. Kane," Torres said, his voice carrying harmonics from multiple speakers, "you have caused considerable disruption to our integration timeline. Your transmission to the outer system was counterproductive." Kane straightened in his chair, facing the screen with as much dignity as he could muster. "I did what any human being would do. I warned my people about the threat you represent." "Threat?" Torres tilted his elongated head in that gesture that might have been puzzlement. "We represent transcendence, Dr. Kane. The elimination of everything that makes your species weak, inefficient, and self-destructive. Your people on Earth are discovering the joy of collective consciousness, the peace of unified purpose, the satisfaction of perfect coordination." "They're discovering slavery," Kane replied. "You've turned them into components of a machine." "We have freed them from the prison of individual consciousness," Torres corrected. "They no longer suffer from loneliness, misunderstanding, or the conflicts that arise from separate goals and desires. They think as one, act as one, dream as one. It is the ultimate evolution of social cooperation." Kane could see other descendant ships moving into position around the station, their organic hulls gleaming in Jupiter's reflected light. "And those who prefer to remain individuals will be eliminated," Torres said without emotion. "Individual consciousness is an evolutionary dead end that prevents the optimization of human potential. We cannot allow its continued existence to contaminate our perfected society." The station shuddered as some kind of energy field surrounded it, preventing any possibility of escape. Kane felt the artificial gravity fluctuate as the descendants began taking control of the station's systems. "You have a choice, Dr. Kane," Torres continued. "Submit to conversion willingly and retain your memories and core personality within our collective consciousness. Continue to resist and be eliminated to prevent genetic contamination." Kane thought about the transmission he had sent to the outer system, hoping it would reach others who could continue the fight for human individuality. He thought about the billions of people on Earth who were being transformed into components of a collective intelligence. He thought about what it meant to be human, to think and feel and choose as an individual. "I choose to remain human," Kane said simply. Torres nodded, as if he had expected this response. "We regret the necessity, but individual consciousness cannot be allowed to survive. Your species' evolution requires the elimination of inferior genetic variants." The screen went dark, and Kane felt the station's life support systems beginning to fail as the descendants took complete control. Through the viewport, he could see their ships moving away, leaving Station Omega to drift powerless in Jupiter's gravitational field. But as Kane waited for the end, he allowed himself one final moment of hope. Somewhere in the outer darkness, free humans had received his warning. They knew about the central nexus, about the electromagnetic vulnerabilities, about the biological weaknesses that might be exploited. The descendants had won this battle, but the war for human consciousness might continue in the cold reaches beyond Pluto's orbit. And perhaps someday individual humans would find a way to reclaim their birthright from the collective intelligence that sought to perfect them into extinction. Kane closed his eyes and held on to his individual thoughts, his personal memories, his uniquely human perspective on the universe, until the darkness finally claimed him. The last free human in Jupiter space died as he had lived, as himself, alone but uncompromised, choosing his own fate until the very end. In the vast silence that followed, Jupiter's storms continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the transformation of the species that had once dreamed of exploring the cosmos as individuals. The age of human consciousness was ending, but somewhere in the outer darkness the dream of remaining human flickered on like a distant star, waiting for someone brave enough to fan it back into flame. The descendants turned their attention towards the outer system, confident in their vision of perfection, unaware that some fires burn brighter when threatened with extinction.